Biden reaches a nonpartisan agreement on infrastructure.
I got them $1.9 trillion relief so far.
The Lord of Roths, Peter Theil, another tax cheat. Tim Apple of the I-Mob warns Nancy Pelosi. John McAfee commits suicide. A hero or a foe? Is Warren Buffett about to buy Hershey's? All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the government is finally being useful for once. We have a bipartisan agreement on an infrastructure bill worth about $1 trillion, just pocket change. And of course, the headline reads, EV Subsidies Axed. But for all of you EV maniacs, before you start shitting your pants and selling your Tesla and EV mania stocks, rest assured, while the plan axes EV subsidies, it also calls for $7.5 billion to construct a nationwide EV charging infrastructure network. In addition, Biden's new $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan, wait a minute, the bill was $973 billion in the previous headline, and it's already growing to $1.2 trillion. By the time it passes, it will be at $1.5 trillion. Anyhow, Biden's new $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan includes $65 billion for universal broadband. And here comes the treasure hunt. In the stock market, everybody's hunting for infrastructure stocks that would benefit from this bill. And therefore, here it is, I'm giving you the details. We know that the government always wastes money all over the place. And while on the surface, this bill doesn't include waste, for example, billions of dollars to study the impact of cow farts on the environment, the devil is always in the details. For example, when you read the bill, you see transportation, roads, bridges, safety, public transit. That's all good, right? Airports, water infrastructure. But the devil is always in the details. For example, what is resilience? Is that a key word for passing some money to our billionaire friends worth of $47 billion? And then we have quote-unquote other infrastructure. Wink, wink. Who knows what's under that? But perhaps we are in dire need of infrastructure since we have third world country-like infrastructure. And that was evident last night from the collapse of a residential building over in Miami. A 12-story building collapsed overnight, killing at least one person. We have another building that fell over in Baltimore, and we know that we have bridges falling apart all over the country every single year. The problem, however, that spending on infrastructure, which the country in dire need of, will come at a cost, and this cost will be inflation. Inflation is already rising all over the place. You might have heard or experienced inflation if you happen to be a normal human being who goes to the grocery store, because the Fed and their allies in the media and the likes continued to deny inflation and dismiss the rise of inflation as quote-unquote transitory, whatever the hell that means. And perhaps they are right. In certain circumstances, inflation is indeed transitory. For example, used cars prices, which skyrocketed so far this year. But recently, we've been seeing a pullback in the increase of used car prices. However, you and I know that inflation has always been a monetary phenomenon. And when the Fed prints money out of thin air to the tune of trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, flooding the economy with a tsunami of liquidity that magically finds its way in the pockets of the 1% on Wall Street, not in the pockets of the poor and the middle class, inflation will continue to rise higher. And now we have the fiscal side, the federal government spending at least $1 trillion on an infrastructure plan. And this is, by the way, will be the first bill in many quote-unquote infrastructure bills. And this week alone, we got more inflation data. For example, from the Market Flash PMI, indicating that the delivery times for semiconductors are reaching multi-year highs, and the increase in the waiting time and the delivery times for many products is increasing output loss across many industries, including automotive, household goods, and technology equipment. And that loss of output is contributing to the rise of inflation because demand continues to rise higher, but supply is struggling to keep up. In addition, all of these increases in wait and delivery times are contributing in cost increases for producers, and these producers are passing the extra cost all the way down to the end consumer, you and I, in the form of higher prices. Likewise, we're seeing shipping rates increasing dramatically from China. Remember, one of the biggest contributors for deflation the last few years was China. Now we're seeing costs increasing across the supply chain from China, which is becoming a very large contributor to inflation, not disinflation anymore. Matter of fact, container ships score astronomical 100,000 per day rates. Ask yourself a question. When suppliers pay $100,000 per day to transport the goods they're about to sell to you and I, are they going to eat the extra cost, or are they going to pass the extra cost in the form of price increases to us end consumers? Matter of fact, here is from Chris Williamson, the chief business economist at IHS Markit. The early PMI indicators point to further impressive growth of the U.S. economy in June, rounding off an unprecedented growth spurt over the second quarter as a whole. While both output growth and inflows of new orders have come off their peaks in both manufacturing and services, this is as much due to capacity constraints limiting firms' abilities to cope with demand rather than any cooling of the economy. Although price gauges have also slipped from May's all-time highs, it is clear that the economy continues to run very hot. Prices charged for goods and services are still rising very sharply. Record supply shortages are getting worse rather than better. Firms are fighting to fill vaccines, and manufacturers' warehouses' stocks are being depleted at a worrying rate as firms struggle to meet demand. While the second quarter will likely represent a peaking in the pace of economic growth, a concomitant peaking of inflation is far less assured. But I know, where is inflation, right? I don't see any inflation. Is it here? Is it over there? Perhaps it's underneath here. Let me show you some inflation. Here it is. Perhaps it's getting dangerous now because this inflation is leading to stagflation in the economy, the slowing down of economic growth but maintaining elevated prices across the economy. This week we got data regarding new home sales, and this was a surprise to the downside. Expectations were for a drop of about 0.5%. Instead, we got this surprise 5.9% drop in new home sales. But here's the catch. Prices hit record high. If you are doubting inflation, look no further than the housing market, which is in bubble territory, in mania territory, because buyers have been divorced from any rationale or critical thinking. They're overbidding, overpaying for these houses, and the likelihood is when, not if, when the Fed is forced to taper assets purchasing programs and raising interest rates due to inflation rising out of control, the housing market will come down crashing, and it will make the 2007-2008 housing crash look like a blip on the radar. And for now, we have a divergence for the first time in history between home builders' confidence and home buyers' confidence. Home builders are aware that the bubble and the mania will continue so long as the Federal Reserve continues to buy over $120 billion every month between bonds and mortgage-backed securities, fueling an already hot housing market. On the other hand, we have home buyers' confidence, which is dropping significantly lower. One of these two is wrong because home buyers are deciding to wait on the sidelines, understanding that the housing market has gotten insane and priced out potential buyers out of the market. It doesn't mean that their aggregate demand is gone. They're just waiting for better prices. And the moment they realize that better prices are not going to happen and we're only going to see rates rising higher, they're going to stampede again in buying homes, fueling the housing bubble even larger, until the house of cards comes down crashing. And when we talk about transitory versus non-transitory inflation, for example, used cars prices could be indeed transitory, but the inflation in wages and rent prices are likely to be permanent, not transitory. Your employer is not going to raise your wages. It's not going to pay you 20 to 25 bucks an hour and then come back later and say, oh, you know, this inflation was transitory and I'm going to cut your wages back to 15 bucks an hour. Your landlord is not going to come to you and say, you know what? You signed the lease for 3,000 bucks a month, but inflation turns out to be transitory, and therefore I'm going to reduce your rent back to $2,000 a month. Not gonna happen, baby. And for now, we have a lid on rent inflation because we know that home buyers, at least some home buyers, are giving up on buying homes and they're migrating to the rental market, pushing rent prices to elevate higher across the country. For now, rent prices will remain muted, and the reason is the evictions moratorium. But that is about to expire next month. It was extended today to expire by the end of July. Once that moratorium is expired, we will see the tsunami of evictions across the country because whether you paid your rent or not, landlords want to bring up their property prices and the rent prices to market levels. If you happen to lease an apartment or a house and you've been a tenant for more than 2 years, guess what? Your landlord is losing money. They can lease the same property to a new tenant for a lot more. And therefore, watch out here because your landlord's going to look for any tiny little violation to give you the boot out of the apartment or the house you're currently leasing. Oh, that stray cat you've been feeding? Well, to my knowledge, you adopted the cat. And therefore, that is a violation of your lease because it says no pets. We're going to give you an eviction notice and we're going to replace you with a new tenant who's going to pay a lot more. That is the real reason behind the eviction. So watch out here when you hear the narrative that inflation is transitory. Inflation, the worst of it, hasn't even started. And it is getting extremely alarming out there because while inflation continues to rise higher, economic activities and jobs creation are stalling. For example, today we got the U.S. weekly jobless claims, and they're still hovering above 400,000 claims and not dropping to the estimate of 380,000. Weekly jobless claims have been on a steady decline since the beginning of the year, but now we're seeing claims spiking higher once again. And that is putting the Fed's policies under the microscope. The Fed wanted to increase inflation because they believe that if inflation rises higher, that will come hand in hand with more employment. And we now know that the Fed has been successful in creating inflation, but not in recovering the economy. Matter of fact, prices have risen too high to the point that they're stalling the economic recovery. We're seeing economic activities down, jobs creation down. Meanwhile, prices continue to rise higher. And that is prompting certain Fed presidents and personalities to come out and speak the truth by indicating that the Fed will raise rates as soon as 2022. And of course, we know that the market, the stock market that is an addict to the Fed's liquidity, aka the cocaine operation. And if the Federal Reserve reduces the amount of cocaine it injects into the stock market every month by tapering or raising interest rates, then the party in Wall Street will come down crashing too. And therefore, when Fed President of St. Louis, James Bullard, came out last Friday and said that he was one of the dot plots indicating that interest rates should rise higher by 2022. The market crashed right away and didn't like it at all. And the Fed, including Mr. Chairman Jerome Powell, came out this week walking back the hawkish commentary from James Bullard last Friday, saying, rest assured, we're not going to raise any interest rates anytime soon. We're not going to even taper the assets purchasing program anytime soon. Forget about Bullard. He's not even a voting member anymore. Likewise, we have another Fed member, Bob Kaplan, of the Dallas Fed. He is also speaking the truth by seeing upside risk in the inflation forecast, and he is also indicating the Federal Reserve will start increasing interest rates by 2022. Unfortunately, by speaking the truth, both Bullard and Kaplan got canceled And my suggestion is that us in the non-mainstream media should attempt to interview Mr. Kaplan and Mr. Bullard and have them speak openly and freely about why they think that there is an upside risk to inflation and why they believe that the Fed will raise interest rates as soon as 2022. Now, I know that the Fed has guidelines for all of these Fed members when it comes to interviews. They're not supposed to reduce themselves to the level of YouTubers, but at least we should try. Moving on to market sentiment news. What do you know? The clowns over at Washington, D.C. are actually busy doing their jobs. Not only agreeing on an infrastructure bill, but they have also passed the big tech antitrust bills. These bills passed the House, at least for now, and they are due to pass the U.S. Senate. And we also know that the Biden administration hired Lina Khan to be the head of the FTC, who happens to be a hawk against big technology firms. But all I hear from the bros out there, stick with buying technology stocks, bro. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, to the moon, bro. Meanwhile, we have the regulatory risk looming large. But of course, the biggest target for these antitrust bills is Apple Incorporated, aka the I-Mob. And we call them the I-Mob because this company has failed to innovate for many years now. They produce the same garbage every single year, and their newest innovation is new colors. And therefore, they have to resort to mafia-like behavior to increase their revenues and profits. And they do this via their monopoly called the App Store. Apple gets a 30% cut from every app that operates using their App Store, aka the rent. If you don't pay us the rent, we crack your kneecaps. You go out of business, you're banned from the store. And of course, the leader of this I-Mob is none other than Tim Apple himself. And Tim Apple is displeased with these antitrust bills. And he decided to grab the phone and use speed dial to call his paid servants in DC, namely Nancy Pelosi. Tim Cook called Nancy Pelosi to warn her against disrupting the iPhone with impeding antitrust bills. Hey, old lady, how do you feel if, God forbid, you lose your dentures? That wouldn't be nice, would it? And the absurdity here is, of course, that Nancy Pelosi is a stockholder of Apple. Matter of fact, the majority of Congress and Senate members are investors in Apple because they hold retirement and perhaps investing accounts in the broader market, holding the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, etc. And the largest component of the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 is none other than Apple. So I'll give you 5 seconds here to think about it. Do you really think that politicians will do anything to hurt Apple, aka the retirement accounts? Of course not. But again, the absurdity is the access a CEO of a company has to our politicians, who are supposedly elected by and to the voter, the citizen. But that couldn't be further than the truth. Ask yourself a question. Does Nancy Pelosi even campaigns for her seat anymore? She doesn't even bother, because she knows she will get reelected by default in this banana republic we call California. For example, we have Dianne Feinstein getting elected by default for decades and decades and decades. Likewise, Barbara Boxer. And if Kamala Harris didn't run for VP, she would have been senator for life. This is how California politics work. And this is, by the way, how American politics work in general. But Tim Apple here reminding Nancy of who she really works for. Not us, but for Apple Incorporated. And the absurdity doesn't stop here. Today we had the so-called stress test, where the Federal Reserve tests the largest banks and financial institutions in the country for stressful events, the likes of market crashes, liquidity crunches, natural disasters, etc. Every single bank in the country, every single financial institution in the country, at least the largest ones, managed to pass the stress test. How could they not? When the Federal Reserve banned bankruptcies, banned business failures from corporations, not from small businesses, by the way. Small businesses got wiped out during the pandemic as soon as the aid ran out. But the aid doesn't run out for corporate America. And therefore, you're not going to see defaults or anything like that hurting the banking industry. And as a result, banks and large financial institutions have an enormous amount of cash in their balance sheets. And now that they have passed the stress test, they will use the cash for what? What do you think they're going to use the cash for? New loans for businesses and individuals to grow the economy? How about loan forgiveness for those who are poor and unfairly impacted by the COVID-19 crisis? Of course not. They're going to use the extra cash for stocks buybacks to inflate these stock prices higher and make themselves richer. Matter of fact, JP Morgan has over $500 billion in extra cash, and they're looking to unleash that tsunami of cash in stock buybacks. And therefore, my investment advice is find your favorite criminal organization, aka bank, and buy that stock, because the stock will go higher, guaranteed. For me, I pick the best run criminal organization out there, JP Morgan, because nobody runs a criminal organization better than gangster Jamie Dimon. And that leads us to the conversation that I discussed with you a couple of days ago, when I pointed out for you that Wall Street and politicians are coming after the extra $300 the unemployed are getting per week, blaming that extra aid for wage inflation and the fact that companies and employers are struggling to fill jobs, as if the extra $300 are making those unemployed living like kings and queens, not needing a job at all. God forbid the unemployed use the extra aid to take their time before rejoining corporate slavery, causing wages to rise higher in par to the rise of inflation. God forbid. That's the real problem we have in the economy right now. And I lost subscribers for pointing this out and suggesting that if Wall Street and the government want to cut the extra $300 a week to get us back to fulfill all of these jobs, that's fine, because they claim that the emergency is over, COVID-19 is receding, and we don't need these emergency measures of giving people an extra $300 a week. But to make the situation more equitable, how about cutting the quote-unquote emergency measures for Wall Street? Wall Street has been under emergency measures, quantitative easing, since the last emergency, the financial crisis in 2008. Those emergency measures have not been lifted since then, and the Fed only added to these measures right after the COVID-19 crisis to prevent any failure in corporate America and continue to prop up, preserve, protect, and inflate Wall Street firms. They've been behaving badly, using the cash for stock buybacks instead of investments and saving for a rainy day, because they know that the Fed continues and will continue those quote-unquote emergency measures from the last crisis in 2008. Matter of fact, the Fed continues to pump Wall Street with over $120 billion every month between bond and mortgage-backed securities purchasing to prop up the stock market. So if you're going to cut the $300 the unemployed are getting, please start with cutting the $120 billion Wall Street is getting from the Fed every single month. Oh, what a crazy idea. You want to talk about crazy? Let's talk about the tax-dodging billionaires who continue to use and abuse the system designed to benefit them from their paid dogs over at DC. For example, a few weeks ago, we got the news from ProPublica that the top billionaires in the country, including Jeff Bezos, have been paying zero in taxes for years and years and years. Matter of fact, Jeff Bezos had the audacity of applying for tax credits. Meanwhile, he's the richest man in the world. You want to talk about lazy bums abusing the system and taking advantage of hard-working taxpayers? Don't look at the poor and the middle class, the unemployed. Look at these billionaires who've been abusing the system for years and years and years. And today we got another one, Peter Thiel, who apparently turned $2,000 in 1999 to grow all the way to over $5 billion today, tax-free, without paying a penny in taxes. And the reason is he found a loophole in the taxation laws regulating Roth IRAs. You know, Roth IRAs that you and I use for our retirement plans. Well, Peter Thiel used the same Roth IRA, but this time bending the rules, using the loopholes to pay zero in taxes and growing his wealth by using stock options for PayPal back in the day for cents on the dollar, growing that wealth every single year and moving it to new investments like Palantir, for example. And when that stock goes higher, Peter Thiel's Roth IRA continued to grow larger and larger. All along, not paying a penny in taxes. But I know the extra $300 a week the unemployed are getting, that's the real problem we have to tackle. Not the fact that we have a broken system where these billionaires buy politicians who design the rules and laws to benefit them, excluding them from contributing their fair share. But these same billionaires pounded the chest, claiming patriotism. You want to be a patriot? Start by paying your damn tab. And since we're talking about Peter Thiel, a Bitcoin advocate, let's talk about the tulip market, aka cryptos. You know, the crypto bros keep telling me that cryptos are the future, bro. You don't understand. The fiat currency is dying, and the best alternative is cryptos. All the way from Bitcoin to Dogecoin to Rocket to Tetcoin to WTF coin. That's the future, bro. You don't understand, boomer. You just don't understand. Well, I will understand right after these weird, dark, scammy events taking place in the crypto market. Today, we got this bizarre story. South African brothers disappear along with $3.6 billion in Bitcoin. Of course, we know the $3.6 billion in Bitcoin isn't their money. It's their investors' money. And now that money, poof, gone. But that's the future, bro. That's the stable investment, right? The founders of South Africa's largest cryptocurrency exchange have vanished, along with nearly $3.6 billion in Bitcoin, after telling investors the exchange had been hacked. A Cape Town law firm hired by affected investors says it cannot find whatever that is, the founders of AfriCrypt. The firm has warned crypto exchanges around the world to be on the lookout should anyone try to sell the digital currency on their platforms. This would go down as the largest cryptocurrency loss in history if the money cannot be recovered. A report in April found that 80 largest cyber thefts in the past decade resulted in collective losses of $2.5 billion. This is the largest cyber crime in history. All totaled, about 69,000 bitcoins are missing from the firm, while they were worth $3.6 billion at the time of their disappearance. With recent drops, the value of that wallet currently stands at just under $2.4 billion. And of course, we all remember what happened to the Turkish crypto exchange boss who disappeared and stole $2 billion worth of investors' money along with him. But I know, I don't understand. I'm just, boomer who doesn't understand the crypto market and this new technology. But you got it all. You know everything. This is the future, bro. The stable, reliable investment vehicle. Tulips. These are, by the way, the same people who are borrowing thousands and thousands of dollars that they don't have to invest in these tulips. For all of the propagandists out there who say that this is not a bubble, this is just a healthy bull market, tell me again, how is it a healthy bull market when these are the facts? In a survey of investors among different generations, have you taken on debt to invest? Overall, 40% say yes. Among Gen Zers, 80% have taken debt to invest. We know that they're investing in tulips and meme stocks, and this will end in tears. Millennials, 60% have taken debt to invest. Gen Xers, 28%. And even boomers, 9% have taken debt to invest in this mania bubble market. If this doesn't scare the shit out of you, I don't know what will. When asked what type of debt did you take to invest in tulips or meme stocks, 38% said they took out a personal loan. 23% said they borrowed from friends and family. 14% went into credit card debt. And 13% withdrew or borrowed money from their retirement accounts. 5% refinanced and or took out home equity line of credit. And by the way, this is a public announcement for all of you who have taken debt from me to invest in tulips and meme stocks. If you fail to pay me back, I will channel my inner I mob, my inner Tim Apple, and I will start cracking kneecaps. And you know what? You cannot use the excuse, oh, I forgot about it. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot about the debt I owe you. Well, you know what? Unforget, because here it is. Eli Lilly plans to submit its Alzheimer drug for market clearance under expedited review this year. And we saw Eli Lilly stock skyrocketing higher by the tune of 7%. You see how I segued from sentiment to corporate-specific news? This is what we call skills, kids. More corporate news regarding McAfee, even though John McAfee, the founder of McAfee, has no relation whatsoever with the company called McAfee today. But you might have heard the news that John McAfee, the controversial antivirus software magnate, who's had multiple recent run-ins with the U.S. law, has died at 75. Of course, he didn't just die. He committed suicide. But CNN is not going to tell you that. McAfee was awaiting extradition in a Spanish prison after being charged with tax evasion in the United States last year. Look at how disgusting this is. I don't know how much McAfee owes, but I bet it's pennies. It's a few $1 million here and there, which are pennies to the government and what the Fed is printing every month. Meanwhile, the oligarchs in this country, Jeff Bezos and Peter Thiel, they get to cheat the system and pay zero in taxes for years and years and years, and nobody comes after them. But John McAfee, who dared to challenge the system and maybe had some run-ins with the law, acting crazy, pushing scams here and there, he gets charged with tax evasion. But when Wall Street runs all kind of scams, cryptos, meme stocks, garbage, they get away with it. Not John McAfee. And by the way, McAfee released this tweet last year. I am content in here. I have friends talking about his Spanish prison. The food is good, all is well. Know that if I hang myself a la Epstein, it will be no fault of mine. And this is, of course, sparking conspiracy theories all over the place. But these were not Mr. McAfee's last words. Rumor has it that his last words were, and after this shocking news, let's end with a sweet note. How about Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, but specifically Hershey's? We had the news that a jet owned by candy giant Hershey's made an unusual trip to Omaha, where Warren Buffett lives. And the rumor is that Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway will buy Hershey, or at least a stake in the company. Now, Hershey happens to be one of the value names, one of the few value names left in the market. So it makes sense that Mr. Buffett, who is already an investor in candy company See's Candies, will buy Hershey's. And perhaps after the acquisition, Mr. Buffett will change his title from the Oracle of Omaha to the King of Diabetes. And with that sweet note, we're done here, folks. Thank you for listening. Good night.